We are students of PES University. So we are honored to be here at Funktion Design Studio. We have come here to interview architect Madhusudhan Sridhar. And he's the principal architect of Functions Design, and he's been practicing from 2010. Right? 2010.
Correct.
So we are here. We are going to talk about his remarkable journey in architecture and about his insights in design and his philosophy in design, basically. So I think we had a chance to meet in college.
Yes, correct.
So we were very inspired by your work, and we've also done our homework, and we've come and like we've gone through all your designs, and it was very inspiring to see like how each one of your projects translates into your philosophy of transforming spaces. So that's that, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Right.
So if I can get started, so I want to talk about your personal and professional life and how it translated to where you are today. So could you please briefly introduce about how the firm started and a brief introduction on your journey?
So, somewhere around 2007-8, I quit my last job out of sheer exhaustion. So I used to work till something like 2 in the morning every other day. And then I just quit my last job, and I was doing nothing. And then I did this interior for this French company. So that was very starting of that journey actually. And I didn't have a firm, so I teamed up with a friend whose father had a practice, and that went on like about 2 years, and then subsequently at around 2010 I started my own firm, and it was just like very organic. It was not something that was planned, and I not planned too much in my career. So that's how it's. But the thought process was always that keep things very experimental and always evolving, always changing. So that's always been a constant.
So what motivated you to start Function Design? Of like something of your own, and what was the vision in your mind that okay, 10 years down the line I'll be there? Like was there anything of that sort?
Honestly, I didn't expect this firm to last for even 1 year. Okay, when I started out, to be very honest, I didn't even know whether we were going to survive for a year. So it was just like I just started off, and I didn't look so far ahead and think that I have to make this great firm or things like that. It was not that. It was so sometimes you do things because you want to do. Okay, so it's not something that is so planned and strategically planned, saying that I want to be here or be there. Many a time, it's running a firm is like a few steps forward and many steps backwards. So and sometimes you keep reinventing yourself. Things keep changing, and even your own priorities and vision of things keep evolving. And that's perfectly alright. So if you look at my own career, I started off my career in Auroville trying to do earth architecture.
Okay.
And today people say you are known for steel and concrete. Okay, so your influences also change. Your own vision of what good architecture is also changes. So when I was to graduate, I was very deeply influenced by Gautam Bhatia's book on Laurie Baker and things like that. So then somewhere along the way I read Rem Koolhaas's SMLXL, and then that totally blew my mind, on how you look at reinterpreting typologies and how you Uh, uh, how you work in this rather hyper-capitalistic economy actually today. So India is also moving that way. So Kulas was probably one of the earliest architects who understood that. So uh, we as a country also have made big changes from the very socialistic kind of where architects depended largely on the government as a client, primary client. Today we have private enterprise as the primary client, and to be in that dynamic as a practice in a city like Bangalore, which is ever changing, is something that also makes me sort of look at things as they go by, because you don't know, because if you look at India's urbanization, we are one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world, and we are seeing something that the kind of urbanization that Europe had in 100 years. After the Industrial Revolution, what you in Europe encountered in 100 years, we are encountering this in 20 years. So the pace is something else. So, and believe me, none of us architects or urban planners or the governments are actually city planners are actually equipped to deal with this urbanization. So we are also just a small cog in this whole wheel. So it's like that.
Bangalore being the fastest developing city all across the world. I read that.
Yes. Not only Bangalore, I think whole of India is in a urbanizing revolution actually. If you see, even rural areas are getting urbanized in many ways. So that's a reality actually.
So what were the few earlier challenges when you started your firm? Like starting alone, first you would have started alone and then...
Yeah, so I first started off one. It was not actually alone, it was like maybe 2-3 people. And so my first employee was a Malayali draftsman who didn't know English. So that was interesting. So the first 6 months was only sign language. So I was pointing at the cursor, pointing at the screen. And so that was the earliest challenge. He was my first employee. So it was quite. So then then you had people. So it's always been evolving. So that's how it is. So also many a time when you're much younger, clients don't take you very seriously. So they don't see the body of work. So that's a big challenge. So it's I've been fortunate that I have had some clients who have just trusted their gut feeling that we will deliver something good. And in those initial years, it was a big risk that they took.
Yeah.
So with that, I should tell you that in 2002, when I was just about to graduate and I was still doing my internship in Norway, my sister was my first client. Okay, and she had just finished her chartered accountancy and she just got married, and I built a house for her just down the road from here. And I don't think there's a bigger risk taker than my sister. To be honest.
The first client is always the risk taker.
No, that too. I was like, I built nothing, and I was just not even graduated. So, so yeah.
So you did your first project before graduation.
Yeah. And the cocky me that I was, by midway to the project, I sacked the structural engineer also. Because he was providing beams where I didn't want him to. So I sacked him. And mind you, by the time the house was completed, my sister was almost into her pregnancy. And she was like 8 months pregnant with a newbie architect brother and a structural engineer who just got sacked.
But how was it, sir, after you finished your
But what that one project taught me was how little I knew. Okay, it was a rude awakening. No matter what theories you have in your head, how much you have read, how much you've seen. Unless you build stuff as an architect, you just don't know how you just don't know much about yourself actually. So the only way that you can really know and learn architecture is to build stuff. But it's a huge cost, of course, because so that's why I always tell people that it's good to actually work in a firm. So that's when I went back and worked in a couple of firms and learned my stuff, and then started my practice much later. But that's very important. So because one thing is to design stuff, the other thing is to actually realize it as a final end product. And there are many steps to it. There's first thing is your own interaction with the client, your own interaction with the other stakeholders. That's something that college doesn't really equip you for, And that whole sense of negotiation, design negotiation that goes through, and then you come up with a design, and then you actually have to realize it as a project. And there again, there are many stakeholders. There are consultants. There are your own colleagues in the office, and then there are people at site. And to deal with all that is something that takes a lot of maturity, and that comes only after you. So it's easier to learn from somebody else's experience than from your own. Actually, learning from your own is a very expensive affair. So, and it can cost you dearly. So, yeah.
So can you briefly describe about your core philosophy of function design?
So, over the years, one very important thing that I do, even when I teach in colleges, I do tell my students is that no matter how brilliant the building or the space looks, it's very important for it to work well. Okay. And we build and design for people. So people are the core of architecture. If you are not interested in people, you are not an architect. So that interest can be very random things. It can be when you're walking down the street, you look at people, how they sit, where they sit, how they congregate, how they hang out, what are those spaces, it could be just a tree. It could be just a tree where you have a ledge on the tree, around the tree, and it becomes a congregation space. You don't have to do too much. So one very important thing is that we at Function Design have always shied away from being caught up in a style. So style is, I think, a crutch. So saying that this is my signature style is a crutch, because then you're repeating yourself. What's very important to have a process to design, and the materials and the construction methodology comes from that process.
So during the seminar, like you showed us your projects, and what we noticed is that you have a variety of scale and variety of typology. So how do you deal with each typology differently? Because it's a mix of all type of clients. Like for a house, that'd be a single client.
So the thing is that when you don't have a style, when you don't, but you have a process, then it becomes very easy, because then you're not bothered about the visual. What you're bothered about is how do you come to a design, through a design process. So if you have an interesting design process, automatically you come up with an interesting design outcome. So many a time, see, like I'll tell you, like one of my earliest projects in 2012-13 was this Ajax corporate office. At that point in time, we were a 2-people office. So when my client actually, he was not my client then. He just, it was a pitch. So we got this requirement, met this prospective client, and then they gave us this requirement of a typical corporate office. But what we did was, it was a very tight site, because they had a large requirement for a space warehouse at the back. So office was on a very narrow strip actually, and it was a southwest facing facade. So then you have the entire issue of the afternoon sun and radiation and all those things. So what we did was we actually inserted a courtyard in the middle and we put all the workspaces on one end, so all the interactive spaces on the other, and created this whole interpretation of their requirement. So the requirement can be the same, and so we use our logic. So my logic may not be yours. Okay, that's where design becomes interesting. That's where the same design problem can be given to 40 students in a design studio and we could end up with different outcomes. So it's the way you look at whatever you put in your logics and your reasoning to coming up with a design. And then what you do with those logics is up to you, and that's where so there are two parts to design, So there's one part is the tangible part. So what is tangible? And then there's the intangible. So tangible is like saying that in this site plan, entries have to be here, exits have to be here, parking comes here. These are all the very tangible aspects. So if somebody says I'm building an apartment and I'm designing an apartment and apartment should have this many units, the FAR is so much, that's all tangible, correct? That's tangible, you can actually measure it. What is intangible? Intangible is that when you go to that one particular space, it creates that kind of emotion to you. That light streaming in from one corner creates that kind of feel, that kind of something that inside you which, maybe some other space will not. And that's the intangible. Tangible training can easily make you come up with the tangible parts. Most colleges actually are focusing today in India more on the tangible aspects because they at least don't want you to screw that up. Okay. So, but if you don't have the tangible part of it sorted out, any amount of intangible masterpiece that you create is pointless, right? Because we are not artists. We are at some part we are actually providing a service, and at some other we are still artistic and we are providing this cultural mass which people are going to use. Okay, so there's that. You need to marry both those parts in your brain, and that's what good architects do. So when you look at large projects, many a time the master plan is the key on how the project works. So that's what say if you come to the thesis semester in colleges, that's what we train you for. So we will focus on the master plan. It's almost 1 month or 1.5 months in the semester gets used for that master planning, and that same thing happens in the studio, in the offices as well. What happens is you need to get things sorted out in terms of the master plan, and then you work always from whole to part, right? So it's like that. So moment you know that idea of working from the whole to part, so may it be 20 acres or may it be a small 30 feet by 40 feet site, it's the same. So you're looking at the whole. So what you do is that when you look at a small site, like you're building a small house, then what happens is that you're looking around. What is beyond? Like if you look at our office, it's on a 40 feet by 40 feet site. It's a very small site in a very densely packed neighborhood, residential neighborhood. So what I did was I looked beyond the site. If you look beyond the site, there are these beautiful gulmohar trees on the outside. Whilst on the other three sides, you had this packed residential development, right? Small sites, everyone builds really close by. And so what we did was we elevated the studio at the canopy level of the trees. So the studio actually opens out at the canopy level. So then this thought process created when we go back to my reading of Ramkulas and SML Excel, you again go back and he talks about reinterpreting typologies. So it went back to that, and I said that, okay, how do you reinterpret an office? So we put the interactive spaces of the office on the topmost floor, because the reason and logic was that these are spaces which we spend very little time in. So they can be air conditioned, it's alright to be air conditioned. While the studio itself, we were quite clear that we didn't want it to be air conditioned. So this floor of interactive spaces insulates the studio. And the studio actually opens out at the canopy level. And the spaces below is our future expansion, which actually is suspended from above. Above. So this is, so you've seen that, right?
Yes, yes.
So, of course, architects are quite poor guys. We earn very little, so we need some rental income, so we rent it out. That's a different story altogether. But it used to be we used to have events, and it used to be open space, and so that future expansion space is actually on a plywood floor.
Yes, yes.
So it's very flexible. So you can open up parts, you can make cutouts, you can do anything. Even the side walls can be opened up. So
the play of concrete and the steel also enhances the overall look.
yeah, so the concrete portal, so this box of our office actually sits on this concrete portal. So that became a kind of a structural and artistic expression, you know. So it sits on that, and then that went into a lot of discussion with our structural engineer, Mr. Manjunath. Also, we had a lot of discussion. Then we tapered those legs, you know, made it like tapered, three-dimensional taper, you see it. And casting that was a nightmare, yeah. It was just like something that I had sleepless nights about. So designing formwork, you know, we never think about formwork. As architects, we seldom think about how we want to build things. So many of my projects are like that. So if you look at Ajax corporate office, we did this cast in situ patterned concrete. So we got the form liners. So it was the client's idea actually. So the client actually dealt with concrete equipment. So he came up with this idea saying that let's put some texture to the concrete. So we got those, we flew in those form liners from Germany because they were anyway importing other equipment from Europe. So we put that on the same cargo and brought it in.
It's a type of formwork which leaves a mark after the
Yeah, so you have this textured concrete which... So then if you've seen the R&B club here, it was built in 4 months flat. And there was an existing swimming pool underneath.
The tensile structure.
Tensile structure, yeah. So how do you build something so quickly, so fast? And then there were some building regulation issues also. So it needed to be sort of quote unquote temporary in its ways. So, but actually I'll tell you, it's a space that people really enjoy. Many people don't know me it's just down the road from where I live, but people who, many a time I meet people on the walk and then somebody introduced me, hey, this guy designed the deck over there. So like, I realized designing places where people like to drink is very good actually, yeah. So it's like that. So there's no formula. So, and fortunately or unfortunately, we've got projects and clients who have completely different requirements, programs, things like that. So it's never been like a kind of cookie cutter kind of office. So that's always been the case.
So coming to my next question, so how do you deal with clients' feedback during the design process? Like, and how do you align it with your idea, your initial idea? Like many times clients suggest things and which you might not like. So do you have an approach that
most times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you compromise? Do you compromise on your idea or do you find a common ground?
So I remember this interview of IMP, the Chinese American architect, where he talks about how this whole word he coins is quiet persuasion. So when I was much younger, I wanted to sort of hammer in my views and my ideas, and it was all, there's a lot of ego also involved. And over time, what I've grown to understand is that there is room in between my idea and what the client wants, and that room for negotiation probably makes for better architecture sometimes. So many a time you don't understand client requirements, lifestyles, if it's a home especially. So when you provide somebody something that's totally alien to them, it's invariably something that they can't live with. So it's something that takes that degree of maturity to negotiate things. And this, I believe, also starts in the colleges, in the studios, because also being somebody who teaches. So what I was in fact just telling a student of mine a few days ago, his design for his thesis didn't change or evolve from midway the mid semester when I saw his initial ideas to the final ideas, because all the feedback that we gave him, he was not willing to take. And the thing is that I believe that architects are merchants of ideas. So if you go to a shirt or a sari shop, what does a merchant do? If you don't like this sari, you pull out one more sari and say, "Chalo, let's try this one." So maybe he'll pull out 10, but sometimes there may be a client whose requirements may not be with the kind of ideas that you have. So you may have 10 bag of tricks, but none of the 10, so then it's maybe good to say bye-bye, okay? But you should be open to those, saying that, "Chalo, we'll try once more, we'll come back once more." So many a time it's happened that we think that we have come up with a brilliant design, and the client just cans it. So when I was much younger, I used to get terribly upset. I used to stop working for 2 days, and there used to be a lot of melodrama, we used to feel very, over time with so many unbuilt projects. Now the immunity, we have gone a much thicker skin, so yeah, you need to have a thicker skin, and I believe that you should cultivate it from your college days. So you should not be. So at the same time, what I do also say is that if you have a good idea, many a time what I see with a lot of young students and young architects is that they jump ship and abandon the idea just because they don't know whether it's buildable or they don't know. So that's when I always tell them that it's very important to persevere. So sometimes it doesn't happen immediately. You may have the idea, but it doesn't work out initially. But if you keep making multiple iterations, you will come up with something. So before you jump ship, it's very important to try things out. So figure out, reconfigure, come back the next day. So maybe it doesn't happen in one day. So
Planning to this, sir, you told that your first project was for your sister.
mm-hmm.
So what gave you the confidence, like before even graduating, what gave you the confidence, yeah, no, I can build this, I can do it?
When you're very young and seen very little, you have a lot of confidence. I think stupidity gives you a lot of confidence. I think moment you know more, then you have self-doubt. So I'm stupid. Okay. So I thought, I'll do it. Huh? Okay. When you're young and you've seen very little of the world, and you experience very little, and that time you have bursting with confidence, So, in fact, as you grow, I fired the structural engineer, but honestly, I knew better than him.
So I have one question. How different is it to deal with people when it comes to different projects? Like, residential, commercial? How different is it?
So yeah, so see larger projects, the end user may not be somebody you actually interact with. So if you're doing a campus, the student and the teacher are somebody that you'll be not interacting with. So maybe you're designing a school or something, right? Maybe the management are who you actually interact with. But it's very important to think at the back of your mind, what will the student enjoy, what will the teacher enjoy, and what is their requirement, and what is that which will make it a good space for them. Because the management may be looking at budgets, may be looking at fitting in many more classes or many more students, packing more students in. So they have their own agenda of running a business, because today education has become a business. So, but at the back of your mind, you still need to look at it. So that's where, I tell you is like, if you look at this neoliberal economy which is there, it's very important to understand the capitalistic nature of the business and how construction industry is evolving and how your clientele is evolving. But still somewhere be a socialist in your heart, So still somewhere you still think about the greater good of people, the city, people. So that's somewhere architects should still have it at the back of their mind, when you're designing spaces.
So you told that every project that you have worked on has given you a challenge. Can you tell us about one challenge which changed the way you looked at things?
I think every project has its own set of challenges. It's not like one project. It's like a continuum. Practice is like a continuum, and you have one challenge today, and then that challenge doesn't seem on hindsight so big later on, but it's a challenge at that point of time. So it can be various things. Sometimes it could be a bad contractor, it could be a unprofessional consultant. So it could be various things, and sometimes it could be just the construction methodology, the technology, the research that you need to put in. So it could be various things, and one more thing is that this profession is all about people. From the people in your office, to the people in the site, to the clients, the end users. So when you're dealing, the biggest challenge always has been not so much the actual design, but it's about dealing with bringing all these people together and actually realizing a project. And that's the biggest challenge. And in India, almost everyone, until the structure comes up, after the structure comes up, everyone becomes an architect. Okay.
Even the clients become
The client, their uncles, their aunts, their grandfather, whoever, even maybe their pet dog also starts dictating design ideas. So that's a big challenge in our country, because the problem is also we are not sort of design educated, It means at a school level, we don't know what good design is. Like you go to, say, Italy, or you go to any of the good European countries which have good architecture and a history of good architecture. Because Indian architecture, the traditional architecture is somewhere else, the city is elsewhere. So you go to Jodhpur, the new extensions of, say, in Rajasthan, you go to Jodhpur, new extensions. So they are all like any other city. You might think that you are actually in Bangalore. But then you see the old town of Jodhpur, and that's like a museum. So somewhere that sensibility doesn't translate into the new architecture that comes in, or the new buildings. I'm not saying you build like how they built 100 years back or 400 years back. But what I'm saying is the sensibilities of climatic design and things that are completely lost. So our somewhere in our quest to be modern and in the quest to be progressive, we don't have a sense of what we actually are. So the Japanese actually did it very well. You know, they embraced modern architecture, modernism. Somewhere I think also because they already were a minimalistic society in terms of their architecture. If you look at Katsura Palace and all that, they were like very minimalistic. So that minimalism translated into modern architecture also with people like Tadawando, or you look at Kengo Kuma or any of these people. They brought in their own sense of Japanese. You know, it's modern architecture, but it's very Japanese. But one thing I think in India is that we don't know what is truly Indian, because we are such a diverse country. You know, there's like you go every 100 kilometers is a different dialect. So what truly is Indian? And other thing is we are not a minimalistic society. You look at our movies or you look at our weddings and look at anything. There's no minimalism in our movies, cinema. Anything, you look at anything, even our temples, you go to Tamil Nadu temples, they are not minimalist. So the thing is that what makes us truly Indian is something that's a big question mark, and it's also what makes something really luxurious, grand. So now what's happening also in India is that people have got a lot of disposable incomes. So with that disposable incomes also comes a lot of aspiration. But many a times the aspiration is not coupled with good aesthetics. So that's a big challenge actually for architects to understand how to marry that good aesthetic with their aspirations. So it's a constant struggle sometimes. You know. So that's.
So my next topic would be the future vision of architecture. So what do you think about the future of architecture in India and globally?
So one thing I do see is that a lot of architects from around the world want to do projects in India. Recently I also heard that Kupi Mumbai wants to build a tower in Bangalore. So,
Yeah, the NGS line.
so there are a lot of proposals, and they're already very. I know Moshe Safdie has done few buildings in India as well. I think there's one in Bangalore as well. So yeah, there are a lot of international architecture firms which want to work in India because.
But are they allowed to work? Like, are they allowed to set up their headquarters in India? Like, not yet, right?
See, there are regulations, and there are various grey areas. I don't know who's going to sign on the sanction plan. Maybe there's going to be somebody who's a Indian architect.
Okay.
Who's going to be signing on. So that's something that's up to interpretation. But it's a reality. It's reality. So like even in auditing, you have the big four who are there. Like so. Similarly, that's going to happen. There are going to be many larger companies which are going to come into India and set up shop. So that's one thing that's going to happen. Then there's this whole talk about AI, which I come from an era where we still were doing manual drafting, and it was only in my final year that we were introduced to computers. And when I went in for my internship, we had like 2 computers in the office, and they were treated like as if they were like gods. Okay, so so there were only few people who were allowed to touch them. So they're like so things have changed. So when computers came in, I do remember the banking sector. I had relatives in the banking sector, and there was so much of uproar, saying that it's going to take away jobs and things like that, but none of that happened. What happened was people moved from lower skill level jobs to higher skill level jobs. So similarly, I do believe that even architecture, with the advent of BIMs and AI and all these things, what's going to happen is that certain mundane jobs which were probably very well paying but didn't improve anybody's skill, those things are going to become history. So things like rendering. So today you're going to have AI software which can create excellent renders. So that's going to be a reality. So what's not going to be going to change is I don't think AI is going to create a building that's going to have that kind of intangible quality and things like that. And also human ingenuity is not going to change. So that's still going to be there.
So adding on to what you had told earlier, that international companies like say Norman Foster or some other big firms set up shop in India, how will it affect the firms which are in India?
See, India is such a big country, there's a space for everyone. There's space for everyone. We only hope that those firms which come into India don't produce mediocre stuff that's already been there in Indian. Because we've seen many so-called international firms working in India producing very, very mediocre architecture and very thoughtless architecture which don't mean anything to the city. So you look at these IT parks, you go around, they are absolutely soulless architecture. So we just hope that it brings up the scale and the quality of architecture that's seen in the city. Because let's face it, it's the larger projects that actually define the skyline of the city.
Yes.
So it's not the small house that we're going to design and things like that. It's going to be these larger projects that are on the main streets, on the high streets of the city that are going to be defining the skyline of the city. And we hope that those projects are going to be more humane and more responsive to the city's, what the city needs. You look at all this flooding which is happening in Bangalore. So what's happened is the government has actually washed its hands of urban planning. So it's now totally all the newer developments. So most of the flooding what you heard of was earlier, a few years ago you had the whole issue of Balandur Lake overflowing.
Yes.
So there again you look at that whole area, it's all handed over to the builders, developers. And also they're architects. So when you say developers, builders, why do we make them all villains? So they are engaging architects, right? So shouldn't those architects also be made villains to this? So, and also what's happened, the government actually is also to blame. So they have washed their hands off. So even if you look at Yelahanka and all that, this rapid urbanization of farmland which is being taken up in all that Yelahanka, that vicinity, there's no way the water can actually drain out, and there's little thought. So even when you design paving, when you design roads inside housing developments, they should provide for water to seep in, water to drain out. So we are concretizing everything. So that's
the main problem in Bangalore is that the storm water and the sewage water is mixed.
That's a very minuscule issue. I think one of the biggest issues is that the soil has become totally covered with non-porous material.
Yes.
So there is no porosity, there is no way for the water to drain out. So what's happening is all the water, and of course there are people who are deviating, building on lake beds and things like that. So that's also a big concern.
So lastly, what would you give an advice to a budding architect like us? Like what should we do to learn better?
I don't think I'm the right person to give advice because I was never a very good student actually. So, in fact, one of the reasons why I teach is actually because I didn't have probably the right inspiration and role models to inspire me to work. So, I do believe that by going and teaching in colleges, it's my way of doing my bit to produce better architects who are going to come into this profession. So one thing is very important is I learned quite later in my life is to work systematically. So work with a plan. So we somewhere think that we keep postponing things and procrastinating things, and we say, okay, let's go have a chai and a cigarette and God knows what other breaks you will have, and then you think that inspiration is going to strike. It doesn't work that way. Also, one more thing is that this profession takes a lot out of you, so you need to have interests which are beyond architecture. So it's very important to have hobbies. It's very important to have interests which are also you become. One more thing is very often I see young people who read very little. The phone actually has enslaved us, and it's me included. And what's happened, our reading habit has reduced a lot. So with that, so there's so much architecture which has already been done, and such great architecture around the world. It's quite impossible for you to go travel all over the world and see all that architecture unless your father's a crorepati. Okay. So what happens is that many a time the job that they do, somebody with 20 years less experience can do it at half the salary. So what's happening is that today 50 is becoming retirement age for many of these people. But if you look at the life of Frank Lloyd Wright, so you look at Frank Lloyd Wright, what age did he design the Falling Waters?
In 70 or
60 plus. And what age did he design the Guggenheim?
Around that age?
90 years old.
He was 90 years old. Okay.
So it was inaugurated 6 months after his death.
Okay.
So when most people are walking their grandkids and living a retired life, he was having the most productive years of his career. Okay. So when somebody asks me, "What's your best work?" I say, "It's still to come."
You will see.
So there's this interview of Oscar Niemeyer. So Oscar Niemeyer at 100, when he turned 100, he was still doing 8 hours in his office.
Oh my God.
So he stopped working when he was, I think he died grand old age, some 106 or something. And then he worked till I think he was 103 or 104. And there's an interview of him when he turns 100. There's an interviewer asks him about the work that he's still doing, and then he goes and pulls out a transparency butter sheet and he shows him his latest project, which is still to be built. So he's still hopeful that he's going to be building that. So he's going to get built. His design is going to be built. So at 100, mind you. So I don't think we can say that about a software engineer who is still coding at 90 years. No, I don't think that's going to happen.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. This was very insightful. We got to learn a lot. And I hope that we meet again in the future.
Yeah, you can keep dropping by even if you guys want to discuss any of your design work. I may not respond to you immediately. So you can always send me a drawing on WhatsApp or whatever. Okay.
Thank you.